Standing in my childhood kitchen holding a bottle worth more than most people's cars, I watched my parents laugh at what they thought was my pathetic gift. "Oh, Scarlett always trying so hard," Mom had sneered just minutes before, while Dad shook his head in disappointment. They had no idea that the dusty bottle they mocked contained a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem worth $15,000, but their humiliation was just the beginning. What I discovered about my brother's fiancée would shatter our family forever, and my parents' cruelty would come back to haunt them in ways they never imagined. Before we dive into this wild family drama that completely changed my life, I want to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about family betrayal, sweet revenge, and shocking discoveries that will make your jaw drop, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. 2 weeks before my brother Marcus's engagement party, I stumbled upon information that would change everything. Working as a sommelier at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants had its perks, and one of them was access to rare wines that most people only dreamed about. When our wine distributor mentioned he had acquired a bottle of 1947 Chateau d'Yquem from an estate sale, I knew immediately what I had to do. Marcus had always been the golden child. While I pursued my passion for wine and hospitality, he became a successful investment banker, exactly what our parents had envisioned for both their children. The fact that I chose to follow my heart instead of their predetermined path had been a source of constant disappointment. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to compare my modest income to his six-figure salary, my small apartment to his downtown penthouse, my single status to his picture-perfect relationship with Isabella. Isabella Martinez seemed perfect on paper, beautiful, charming, well-educated, and from what appeared to be a wealthy family. She wore designer clothes effortlessly and spoke about art and culture with the kind of confidence that impressed my parents immediately. Mom was already planning their wedding before Marcus even proposed, gushing about how Isabella would finally bring some class to our family. But something about Isabella never sat right with me. Maybe it was my years in hospitality, learning to read people quickly, or maybe it was simple intuition. There were small inconsistencies in her stories, moments when her polished facade would slip just slightly. She claimed to have studied at the Sorbonne, but when I mentioned a professor I knew there, she quickly changed the subject. She talked about growing up in Spain, but her accent seemed to come and go depending on who was listening. The real revelation came completely by accident. I was having lunch with my friend Jessica, who worked in art authentication, when she showed me photos from a recent case she was working on. A wealthy collector had discovered that several pieces in his collection were forgeries, and the investigation had led them to a sophisticated fraud ring operating in the city. "The crazy thing is," Jessica said, scrolling through photos on her phone, "the woman they think is behind it has been infiltrating wealthy families for years. She targets men from established families, gains their trust, then slowly gains access to their valuable collections and financial information." When she showed me the surveillance photo, my blood ran cold. There, clear as day, was Isabella. Not the polished version I knew, but the same face, the same eyes, the same calculating smile I had noticed but never quite understood. "That's my brother's fiancée," I whispered, my hands shaking as I stared at the photo. Jessica's face went pale. "Scarlett, you need to call the police, like right now." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Isabella had been careful building her relationship with Marcus slowly over 2 years. She had met our parents multiple times, attended family events, and had completely won them over. If I went to my family with accusations based on a photo, they would think I was jealous, desperate, or worse, trying to sabotage Marcus's happiness out of spite. I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence that would expose Isabella for who she really was. The engagement party would be the perfect opportunity. With the entire family gathered, including my parents' wealthy friends and business associates, Isabella would be on full display playing her role to perfection. But I would be watching, waiting, and ready to reveal the truth. That's when I decided to buy the Chateau d'Yquem. It wasn't just a gift, it was a test. Isabella claimed to be a wine connoisseur, often correcting others about vintages and regions with an air of superiority that impressed my parents. If she was truly the expert she pretended to be, she would recognize the bottle immediately. If she didn't, it would be another crack in her perfect facade. But I had underestimated just how cruel my parents could be. I had expected them to be pleased with my thoughtful, expensive gift. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to humiliate me once again, to reinforce the narrative that I was the disappointing daughter who would never measure up to their expectations. The irony was devastating. Here they were mocking a gift worth more than some people's annual salaries while praising a woman who was actively planning to defraud their precious son. They were so blinded by their own prejudices and social climbing that they couldn't see the danger standing right in front of them. As I stood in that kitchen listening to their laughter and watching Isabella's calculated smile, I felt something shift inside me. Years of trying to earn their approval, years of accepting their disappointment and criticism, years of being made to feel small and inadequate, it all crystallized into a cold, clear determination. They wanted to mock me. Fine. They wanted to dismiss my expertise and my judgment. Perfect. Because when the truth finally came out, when Isabella's lies unraveled in front of everyone they cared about, impressing their humiliation would be complete. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left standing in the ruins of their expectations. I carefully placed the bottle back in its protective case and smiled. You know what, you're absolutely right. It's probably just cheap wine. I should have bought something more appropriate for such a special occasion. Isabella's eyes flickered with something, relief, suspicion, but she quickly recovered. Oh, don't feel bad, Scarlett. It's the thought that counts, right? The condescension in her voice was the final straw. She had no idea that she was patronizing someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was planning. But she would learn soon enough. They all would. The week following the kitchen incident, I threw myself into investigation mode with the precision I usually reserved for wine tastings. Every detail mattered. Every inconsistency could be the key to exposing Isabella before she could complete whatever scheme she was running on my family. I started with Jessica's contacts in art authentication and fraud investigation. Detective Raymond Brooks had been tracking the art forgery ring for over a year, and when I reached out through Jessica, he was more than willing to meet. His office in downtown Manhattan was cramped and cluttered with case files, but his eyes lit up when I mentioned Isabella's name. We've been trying to get close to her for months, he explained, spreading photos and documents across his desk. She goes by different names: Isabella Martinez, Elena Santos, Sophia Delacroix. Always targets wealthy families, always plays the long game. She's sophisticated, patient, and incredibly dangerous. The evidence was staggering. Bank records showed multiple accounts under different names, all connected by the same Social Security number and fingerprints. Property records revealed expensive apartments paid for in cash, always abandoned after a few months. Most damning of all were the victim statements from 3 previous families who had discovered too late that their son's perfect girlfriend had systematically stolen valuable artwork, emptied bank accounts, and disappeared without a trace. The problem is proving it, Detective Brooks continued. She's careful never to leave a paper trail that directly connects her to the thefts. By the time families realize what happened, she's already established herself somewhere new with a completely different identity. But this time would be different. This time we had advance warning and the opportunity to catch her in the act. Detective Brooks explained that they suspected Isabella was planning something big for the engagement party itself. These events were perfect opportunities for her to photograph valuable items, overhear financial discussions, and cement her position within the family before making her move. What we need, he said, is solid evidence that she's actively planning to defraud your family. Recordings, photographs, documentation of her lies, something that would hold up in court. That's where my unique position became crucial. As the family member who knew the truth, I could observe Isabella's behavior, document her lies, and potentially catch her in moments when her guard was down. But I would have to be incredibly careful. If she suspected I knew who she was, she might disappear immediately, leaving Marcus heartbroken and my family none the wiser about how close they had come to disaster. I spent the next few days crafting my strategy. First, I needed to document her lies about her background. I started casually bringing up topics related to her supposed education and upbringing, recording our conversations on my phone. When she claimed to have studied winemaking in Bordeaux, I asked detailed questions about specific vineyards and techniques. Her answers were vague and often contradictory, clearly memorized rather than experienced. Second, I needed to understand her plan for the engagement party. Through careful observation and strategic eavesdropping, I learned that Isabella had been asking Marcus detailed questions about our family's artwork, particularly the valuable pieces my grandfather had collected during his business travels in Europe. She seemed especially interested in a Monet sketch that hung in my parents' dining room, asking Marcus about its provenance and insurance value under the guise of wanting to learn about art appreciation. Most importantly, I discovered that Isabella had been slowly gaining access to Marcus's financial information. She had convinced him to add her to his bank accounts for convenience, and had been asking questions about his investment portfolio and our parents' estate planning. Marcus, completely smitten and trusting, shared everything without hesitation. The pattern was becoming clear. Isabella wasn't just planning to steal during the engagement party. She was positioning herself for a much larger long-term theft that could financially devastate my entire family. The engagement was just another step in cementing her position before she made her move. Armed with this information, I began preparing for the party with military precision. I purchased a small recording device that looked like a decorative pin, perfect for capturing conversations without raising suspicion. I researched every detail about the Chateau d'Yquem I had purchased, memorizing not just its value, but its history, tasting notes and significance in the wine world. If Isabella truly was the expert she claimed to be, she would have to acknowledge its importance. But more than anything, I prepared myself emotionally for what was coming. I knew that exposing Isabella would be devastating for Marcus, who genuinely believed he was in love with her. I knew it would humiliate my parents, who had bragged extensively about their son's sophisticated fiancé to their social circle. The fallout would be severe and long-lasting. Yet as I remembered their cruel laughter in the kitchen, their dismissive attitudes toward my career and achievements, their blind favoritism toward Marcus and everything he represented, I felt my resolve strengthen. They had chosen to mock and dismiss me without knowing the full story. Now they would learn the consequences of their assumptions. The night before the party, I called Detective Brooks to confirm our plan. He would be positioned nearby, ready to move if we gathered enough evidence for an arrest. I would wear a wire document Isabella's behavior and try to catch her in compromising situations that would expose her true intentions. Remember, he warned me, she's dangerous precisely because she's so good at reading people and situations. If she realizes you're onto her, she'll either disappear or potentially become desperate enough to do something drastic. Be careful, but be thorough. This might be our only chance. As I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. Gone was the eager-to-please daughter who had spent years trying to earn her parents' approval. In her place was someone harder, more determined, and absolutely committed to protecting her family even if they didn't deserve it. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow the truth would finally come out, and everyone who had underestimated me would learn exactly what happened when you pushed Scarlett Morrison too far. The night of Marcus's engagement party arrived with the kind of crisp autumn evening that made Manhattan feel magical. My parents had spared no expense transforming their Upper East Side penthouse into an elegant celebration space filled with white roses, crystal chandeliers, and enough expensive champagne to impress their most discerning guests. Everyone who mattered in their social circle was there: business associates, country club friends, and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate what they believed was Marcus's perfect match. I arrived fashionably late, carrying my precious cargo in an elegant wooden box that had cost almost as much as some people's monthly rent. The Chateau d'Yquem deserved proper presentation, and I wanted every detail to be perfect for what was about to unfold. My recording device was perfectly positioned, my phone ready to capture evidence, and my heart was pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The moment I walked in, I could feel the familiar weight of my family's expectations and disappointments. Aunt Margaret immediately commented on how thin I looked. Uncle Robert asked when I was planning to get a real job, and my cousin Jennifer made pointed remarks about my single status. But tonight their casual cruelty rolled off me like water. I had bigger concerns than their petty judgments. Isabella looked absolutely stunning, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars and jewelry that caught the light with every movement. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, charming everyone she met with stories about her sophisticated background and cultured upbringing. Watching her work was like observing a master artist. Every gesture calculated, every smile perfectly timed, every conversation steered toward gathering information that could be useful later. Marcus was glowing with happiness, introducing his fiancée to everyone with obvious pride. He had no idea that the woman he loved was systematically cataloging the valuable items in his family's homemaking mental notes about security systems and building a detailed map of their financial vulnerabilities. The innocence in his eyes was heartbreaking, and for a moment I almost wavered in my resolve. But then I heard my mother's voice cutting through the crowd like a knife. "Oh, here she is," Mom announced as I approached the gift table. "Our little sommelier, with her mysterious bottle of wine. I do hope it's not too embarrassing." The entire crowd turned to watch as I carefully placed the wooden box on the table. Dad joined in immediately, his voice dripping with the kind of condescending amusement that had defined my childhood. "Scarlett always did have champagne tastes on a beer budget. I'm sure it's very thoughtful, dear." The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. These were people I had known my entire life, family friends, who had watched me grow up, and they were all participating in my humiliation as entertainment. But what hurt most was seeing Marcus join in, shaking his head with fond exasperation, as if my gift was another example of my tendency to overreach. Isabella moved closer, her eyes glittering with what I now recognized as predatory interest. "How sweet of you, Scarlett. May I see what you brought?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. With steady hands, I opened the wooden box to reveal the bottle, its aged label, and distinctive shape immediately visible to anyone with real knowledge of fine wine. I watched Isabella's face, carefully looking for any sign of recognition, any indication that she truly possessed the expertise she claimed. Her reaction was perfect in its fakery. She picked up the bottle with casual confidence, holding it like any other wine, examining the label with what appeared to be sophisticated interest. "Oh, how lovely," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of impressed surprise. "A sauterne, and quite old, too. This must be from, let me see, 1970-something. The silence that followed was deafening to anyone who understood wine. She had just demonstrated complete ignorance about one of the most famous and valuable wines in the world, mistaking a 47 vintage for something 30 years younger and showing no recognition of its legendary status. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "Actually, Isabella, it's a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem, one of the greatest vintages ever produced." For just a split second, I saw panic flicker across her features before she recovered with a laugh. "Of course, I was just testing to see if anyone else here knew their wines. Very impressive, Scarlett." But the damage was done. Several guests who actually knew wine were staring at her with confusion and dawning suspicion. James Wellington, a friend of my father's who owned one of the city's premier wine collections, stepped forward with obvious interest. "Did you say 1947 Chateau d'Yquem?" he asked, his voice rising with excitement. "My God, Scarlett, do you know what this is worth?" The crowd pressed closer as James carefully examined the bottle, his expertise evident in every movement. "This is extraordinary," he continued, his voice filled with awe. "A 47 Weequem in this condition could be worth $15,000, possibly more. Where on earth did you find this?" The shock that rippled through the crowd was immediate and complete. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and suddenly everyone was looking at me with new eyes. The daughter they had dismissed as financially unsuccessful had just presented a gift worth more than many of their cars. My mother's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally a desperate attempt to save face. 15,000, she repeated weakly. Surely there's been some mistake. But James was already on his phone pulling up auction records and expert evaluations. No mistake at all. Look here, a bottle just like this sold last month for exactly that amount. Scarlett, this is museum-quality wine. How did you possibly afford something like this? I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring the complete reversal of the evening's dynamic. Well, I said softly, it helps when you actually understand wine instead of just pretending to. Isabella's face had gone pale, but she was still trying to maintain her facade. How wonderful that you splurged on such a special gift, she said, but her voice sounded strained. Splurged, I laughed. Isabella, I bought this because I knew Marcus would appreciate its significance. Anyone with real knowledge of wine would recognize its importance immediately. It's the kind of bottle that true connoisseurs dream of owning. The trap was closing beautifully. Every lie Isabella had told about her wine expertise was now exposed, every claim to sophisticated knowledge revealed as pure fabrication. The guests who had been impressed by her cultured persona were beginning to whisper among themselves, noticing inconsistencies they had overlooked before. But I wasn't finished. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I had been using all week. You know, Isabella, I've been curious about your background in wine. You mentioned studying in Bordeaux, but when I asked about specific chateaux and techniques, your answers were quite interesting. The color drained completely from her face as she realized what was happening. Around us, the party atmosphere had shifted entirely. What began as a celebration was becoming something else entirely: an interrogation, an exposure, a reckoning. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Scarlett, what are you doing? What's going on? I looked at my brother, seeing him clearly, for perhaps the first time in years. Not the golden child who could do no wrong, not the successful banker who made our parents proud, but a vulnerable man who was about to have his world shattered. Despite everything, despite years of being compared to him and found wanting, I felt a surge of protective love. Marcus, I said gently, I need to tell you something about Isabella, something important that everyone in this family needs to hear. The silence that followed my words was absolutely electric. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, the collective held breath of guests who sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Isabella's composure was cracking like ice under pressure, and Marcus looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. What I'm about to tell you might sound impossible. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. But 3 weeks ago I discovered that the woman my brother is engaged to marry is not who she claims to be. Isabella laughed, but the sound was sharp and desperate. Scarlett, this is ridiculous. Are you seriously going to ruin Marcus's engagement party with whatever jealous fantasy you've cooked up? Jealous fantasy. I pulled out my phone again this time, opening the photos Detective Brooks had shared with me. Is that what you call FBI surveillance photos? The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Marcus stepped closer, his face pale as he stared at the screen. There was Isabella, or rather the woman calling herself Isabella, in a series of surveillance photographs taken outside various upscale locations throughout the city. Her real name isn't Isabella Martinez. I continued, my voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around me. She's part of a sophisticated fraud ring that targets wealthy families. She's done this before Marcus, multiple times. Isabella made a move toward the door, but James Wellington and 2 other guests had positioned themselves to block her exit. Her mask was completely gone now, replaced by the cold calculation of someone whose carefully laid plans were collapsing. You have no proof of anything, she snarled, her accent shifting noticeably. These are just photos. Anyone can manipulate photos. That's when Detective Brooks chose to make his entrance. I had texted him the agreed-upon signal 5 minutes earlier, and he appeared now with 2 other officers, their badges clearly visible as they moved through the crowd. Actually, we have quite a bit of proof, Detective Brooks announced. Elena Santos, also known as Sophia Delacroix, also known as Isabella Martinez, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The explosion of voices was immediate and overwhelming. Guests were shouting questions, my parents were demanding explanations, and Marcus stood frozen in shock as the woman he loved was handcuffed in front of everyone who mattered to him. But Detective Brooks wasn't finished. As Isabella was read her rights, he addressed the crowd with professional efficiency. This woman has been under investigation for over 18 months. She's wanted in connection with thefts totaling over $2 million from 3 separate families. Her method is always the same: infiltrate wealthy families through romantic relationships, gain access to valuable assets and financial information, then disappear with everything she can carry. My mother finally found her voice. But she seemed so cultured, so educated. How could we not have known? Because she's very good at what she does, Detective Brooks replied. She studies her targets extensively, learns enough about art, wine, and culture to pass casual scrutiny. But as your daughter discovered, her knowledge is superficial. When pressed by someone with real expertise, the facade crumbles. All eyes turned back to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something new in my parents' expressions. Respect tinged with shame. They were beginning to understand that while they were mocking my career and expertise, I had been using that same knowledge to protect them from a devastating fraud. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, I admitted. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything. I couldn't risk being wrong about something this serious. "But why didn't you come to me immediately? Why wait until tonight?" The pain in his voice almost broke my resolve, but I had to tell him the complete truth. Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. Because I knew Mom and Dad would think I was just jealous or trying to sabotage your happiness. I needed evidence that no one could dismiss or explain away. Isabella, Elena, whoever she really was, spoke for the last time as the officers prepared to escort her out. "You think you've won something?" she said to me, her voice filled with venom. "You've destroyed your brother's happiness just to prove how smart you are. He'll never forgive you for this." But Marcus surprised everyone, including me. He stepped forward, his jaw set with new determination. "No," he said firmly. "She saved me. She saved all of us." He turned to face our parents, and I saw years of blind favoritism finally being questioned. Scarlett risked everything to protect this family. And what did we do? We mocked her. We dismissed her. We treated her like she was stupid when she was the only one smart enough to see through the lies. As the police led Isabella away, the crowd began to disperse, guests streaming out with the kind of shocked excitement that would fuel gossip for months to come. But I barely noticed. I was focused on my family, watching as the dynamics I had known my entire life shifted and rearranged themselves into something completely new. Dad approached me first, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching humility. "The wine," he said quietly. "It really is worth $15,000. Every penny, I confirmed. And Isabella's reaction to it confirmed everything I suspected about her fake expertise." Mom was crying now, tears of embarrassment and realization streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We were so horrible to you tonight. We always are. And you still protected us." The weight of their acknowledgement was almost overwhelming, but I wasn't ready to forgive quite yet. "I protected Marcus," I said simply, "and I protected the family legacy that Grandpa worked so hard to build. But mostly I did it because it was the right thing to do, not because any of you deserved it." The truth of that statement hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time in my life, I saw my parents truly seeing me, not as the disappointing daughter who didn't meet their expectations, but as the person who had saved them from complete financial ruin. The weeks following the engagement party were a whirlwind of FBI interviews, media attention, and family reckonings that had been decades in the making. The investigation revealed the full scope of Elena's crimes, and the numbers were staggering. She had been planning to steal not just from Marcus, but from our entire extended family network, using the engagement and upcoming wedding as opportunities to access multiple homes' bank accounts and valuable collections. Detective Brooks explained that they found detailed floor plans of my parents' penthouse in Elena's apartment, along with photographs of every valuable piece of art and jewelry in the house. She had been methodically cataloging everything for months, building a comprehensive map of what she could steal and when. The engagement party was supposed to be her final reconnaissance mission before the actual thefts began. "You prevented what would have been one of the largest domestic fraud cases we've seen," Detective Brooks told me during one of our follow-up meetings. She had access to not just Marcus's accounts, but through him, she was gathering information about your parents' investments, your uncle's art collection, even your cousin's trust fund. The total potential loss was over $5 million. The media coverage was intense, but ultimately positive. The story of the sommelier who exposed a sophisticated fraud ring captured public imagination, and suddenly I was fielding interview requests from newspapers, magazines, and television shows. My expertise in wine, which my family had always dismissed as impractical, was being celebrated as the key insight that cracked a major criminal case. But the most significant changes were happening within my own family. Marcus went through what could only be described as an emotional and psychological reckoning. The man who had seemed to have everything figured out was forced to confront the fact that he had been completely deceived by someone he trusted completely. "I keep replaying every conversation, every moment," he told me during one of our long talks in the weeks that followed. "How could I have been so blind? There were signs, weren't there? Things that should have made me suspicious." I was gentle with him, but honest. There were inconsistencies, but Elena was extremely skilled at deflecting attention from them. She studied you, studied all of us, and she knew exactly how to present herself to get what she wanted. The hardest part for Marcus was accepting that his judgment, which he had always trusted implicitly, had failed him so completely. "I pride myself on being smart about business, about investments, about reading people in professional situations," he said. But when it came to my personal life, I was completely naive. My parents' transformation was even more dramatic. The shock of nearly losing everything to someone they had welcomed into their home forced them to examine not just their judgment about Elena, but their treatment of their own children. The daughter they had consistently undervalued had saved them from financial ruin, while the son they had always favored had nearly handed over their legacy to a criminal. Mom attempted to apologize multiple times, but her efforts were clumsy and often self-serving. "I just don't understand how we got it so wrong," she would say, as if their mistake was simply a misunderstanding rather than years of dismissive treatment. "You've always been so smart, Scarlett. We should have listened to you." Dad's approach was more direct, but equally problematic. He wanted to solve everything with money and grand gestures, offering to invest in a restaurant for me to help me start my own wine business, to essentially buy his way back into my good graces. "Name your price," he said during one particularly awkward conversation. "Whatever it takes to make this right." But what they still didn't understand was that their problem wasn't a lack of recognition for my intelligence or capabilities. The real issue was decades of conditional love, of treating me as less valuable than Marcus simply because I had chosen a different path. Their newfound respect felt hollow because it was based on external validation rather than genuine appreciation for who I was as a person. The extended family's reaction was equally revealing. Relatives who had spent years making snide comments about my career were suddenly effusive in their praise. Aunt Margaret, who had consistently criticized my life choices, was now telling everyone about her brilliant niece who saved the family. Uncle Robert wanted to introduce me to his business associates as the wine expert who cracked a major fraud case. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but it also provided perfect clarity about who these people really were. Their opinions of me had changed, not because I had changed, but because my value had been publicly validated in terms they could understand and respect. James Wellington, the wine collector who had identified the Chateau d'Yquem's value at the party, became an unexpected ally and mentor. He understood the wine world in ways my family never could, and he appreciated my expertise on its own merits rather than as a tool that happened to solve a problem. "You have a remarkable palate and an impressive depth of knowledge," he told me over lunch at his private club. Have you ever considered sommelier competitions? With your skills and the publicity from this case, you could build a significant reputation in the industry. For the first time in weeks, I felt excited about my future rather than exhausted by my past. James introduced me to other serious collectors and industry professionals, opening doors that I never could have accessed on my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena's criminal scheme had inadvertently launched my career to new heights. The legal proceedings moved forward with Elena pleading guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for providing information about her accomplices. She would serve at least 8 years in federal prison, and restitution orders ensured that her previous victims would recover most of their stolen assets. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Elena's lawyer approached me about providing a character reference that might help reduce her sentence. The audacity was stunning. The woman who had tried to destroy my family was asking me to help minimize her punishment. "Tell your client," I told the lawyer calmly, "that she already received more mercy than she deserved. If I hadn't exposed her when I did, she would have stolen everything from people who trusted her. 8 years seems perfectly appropriate for someone who spent years planning to devastate multiple families." As autumn turned to winter, I realized that the engagement party had been more than just the exposure of a criminal. It had been a catalyst that forced my entire family to confront truths they had been avoiding for decades. The question now was whether they were capable of real change, or if this was just another temporary adjustment in the endless cycle of family dysfunction. 6 months after that life-changing engagement party, I stood in the private dining room of Le Bernardin, preparing to conduct a wine tasting for 12 of New York's most influential collectors. The irony was delicious. The same expertise my family had mocked was now opening doors to opportunities I had only dreamed about. James Wellington had been true to his word, and my reputation in the wine world was growing exponentially. The changes in my family had been slower and more complicated than anyone expected. Marcus had thrown himself into therapy, determined to understand how he had been so thoroughly manipulated. He was dating again, but cautiously, with a new appreciation for the difference between genuine connection and calculated charm. Most importantly, he had become my strongest ally within the family, consistently defending my decisions and supporting my career in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. "I've been thinking about what Elena said that night," he told me during one of our weekly dinners, "about how you destroyed my happiness just to prove how smart you were. She was wrong about everything except one thing. You are incredibly smart, and I spent years not seeing it because I was too comfortable being the favorite." My parents' evolution had been more challenging to navigate. They wanted desperately to repair our relationship, but they struggled to understand that their decades of dismissive treatment couldn't be erased by a few months of overcompensation. Dad's grand gestures continued. He had offered to buy me a restaurant 3 more times, while Mom oscillated between excessive praise and attempts to rewrite history that minimized their past behavior. The breakthrough came during a family dinner where Dad was once again offering unsolicited business advice, treating my career as a hobby that needed his guidance to become legitimate. I finally lost my patience. "Stop," I said firmly. "Just stop. You want to support me? Then respect that I'm 32 years old and I've built my expertise through years of hard work, not luck or family connections. You want to help. Then listen when I talk instead of waiting for your turn to speak. You want to make amends. Then acknowledge that your treatment of me was wrong, not just unfortunate or misunderstood." The silence that followed was profound, but it was different from the uncomfortable quiet that had characterized our family dynamics for years. This was the silence of people actually thinking, actually processing, actually considering change. Mom spoke first. "You're right," she said quietly. "We didn't just fail to recognize your abilities. We actively diminished them because they didn't fit our narrow definition of success. That wasn't unfortunate. It was cruel." Dad's acknowledgement was harder won, but when it came, it felt authentic. "I've spent my whole life believing that financial success was the only measure that mattered," he admitted. "I taught Marcus that philosophy and I punished you for rejecting it. But you saved us all with knowledge and skills that had nothing to do with money or status. I was wrong about what matters." The healing wasn't instant or complete, but it was real. Family dinners became actual conversations rather than status updates and competitions. My parents started asking genuine questions about wine, about my work, about my perspectives on things beyond their immediate experience. Marcus began including me in his social events not as an obligation, but because he genuinely valued my company and insights. The most unexpected change came from my extended family. The relatives who had spent years making snide comments about my career were suddenly eager to learn from me. Cousin Jennifer, who had been particularly cruel about my single status, sheepishly asked for advice about the wine selection for her own wedding. Uncle Robert wanted recommendations for his business dinners. Even Aunt Margaret requested help choosing wines for her dinner parties. Their motivations weren't entirely pure. My newfound fame definitely influenced their changed attitudes. But I found I didn't care about their motivations as much as I had expected. Having my expertise valued and sought after felt good, regardless of the reasons behind it. The wine industry embraced me with enthusiasm that still sometimes took my breath away. I had been featured in Wine Spectator magazine, invited to judge prestigious competitions, and offered consulting positions with high-end restaurants throughout the city. The criminal case had given me name recognition, but my knowledge and palate had earned me respect. Most remarkably, I had been approached by a publisher about writing a book. Not just about wine, but about trusting your instincts and standing up for what you know to be true, even when everyone around you disagrees. The working title was The $15,000 Lesson, and I was discovering that I loved writing almost as much as I loved wine. Elena's final conviction had brought a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. She received 12 years in federal prison after additional charges were filed related to her other victims. The judge specifically mentioned that her sophisticated planning and manipulation showed a level of criminal intent that deserved serious consequences. "You targeted families at their most vulnerable moments," the judge had said during sentencing. "You exploited trust, love, and celebration to facilitate theft and betrayal. Your actions caused not just financial damage, but emotional trauma that will last for years." I attended the sentencing not out of vindictiveness, but because I wanted to see the end of this chapter. Elena looked smaller, somehow stripped of the designer clothes and confident facade that had defined her false persona. She glanced at me once during the proceedings, and I saw something that might have been regret, though it could just as easily have been resentment at being caught. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had tried to destroy my family was facing justice. My family was finally seeing me clearly and treating me with respect. My career was flourishing beyond my wildest dreams. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and expertise even when everyone around me disagreed. The $15,000 bottle of Chateau d'Yquem had been more than just an expensive gift or a clever trap. It had been a symbol of everything I knew and valued that others had dismissed. When my family finally understood its true worth, they began to understand mine as well. Looking back, I realized that Elena had unwittingly given me the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to prove to myself and everyone else exactly what I was capable of when pushed to my limits. She had intended to steal from my family, but instead, she had revealed treasures that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Now, as I prepare to launch my own wine consulting business with James Wellington as my first major client, I can't help but smile at how dramatically my life has changed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate planning or calculated payback. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let other people's limited vision define your worth. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and exposing a truth that would change everything? When someone you love is being deceived, how far would you go to protect them, especially when they might not thank you for it? I learned that sometimes being right isn't enough. You have to be brave enough to act on what you know, even when the cost seems unbearable. Family loyalty isn't about blind support. It's about loving someone enough to save them from themselves, even when they can't see the danger. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when your expertise or instincts saved someone who had underestimated you. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Share this with anyone who has ever felt overlooked or undervalued by their family. Sometimes we all need reminding that our worth isn't determined by other people's recognition. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, trust your instincts, value your expertise, and never let anyone convince you that your knowledge doesn't matter. The truth has a way of revealing itself when we have the courage to stand behind what we know.